We are. Sorry, you're not on the camera, Brandon.
That's okay. I'm good with that. Where is the camera, by the way? Oh, it's over there.
Yeah.
Where's the?
Ready? Word. Okay. All right, no rush, but we'll get it in when you are.
We're ready to start
We're
then?
ready to start.
Okay, we'll call this Board of Adjustment meeting to order. Looks like our first item is Pledge of Allegiance. So I guess we have a flag, right?
Right over there, and you're saying. Board member, I want to call the commissioner. Evans.
Okay. I thought I had the thought, but
Well, you have both.
oh, I have both.
Yes,
Okay.
we doubled it up on you.
After me. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Am I saying the prayer too?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Also, it's a package deal.
It's packaged still.
You're the only one that can get above the ceiling here.
Okay, well, all right. That sounds good. Our Father in heaven, we bow our heads before thee at the opening of this board. Grateful for this. We ask the Heavenly Father to bless us tonight, that we can be open-minded and that we can listen with intent, that we can understand fully the issues at hand, and that we can resolve it and come up with a solution that is beneficial. Father, we're grateful again for all that we have, and we ask that you be with us at this meeting and throughout this week as we are thankful for all that we have. We pray for these things humbly in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, the thought that I have is by Samuel Goldwyn. And it's pretty short, but it says, when someone does something good, applaud. You will make two people happy. And as I thought about that, I thought that, we live in a day and age where we focus too much on the negative, I think. The negativity that's going on in the world and around us. And I think if we all focused on the good and applauded that good, I think we could be much better off as a people and as a society.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Declaration of conflicts of interest. Do we have any conflicts of interest concerning this property or anything to do with it? I think we're okay there. So we move on to appointments. Discussion of appointing a chair. Right now, I am the chair. I've been chair for the last 4 or 5 years anyway. Since Tim Blackburn was the last chair, I took his place. So if anybody else on the board here would like to be the chair, I am open to it. Any volunteers?
We all slide to the table.
Yeah.
I think you've done a good job.
I do too. I'm perfectly happy with this.
And so one of the things, and I don't know, I guess I should have made you all aware that we just recently had the council reappoint you. There were just some questions with timelines and appointments, and we just wanted to clean up. And so we're definitely welcome to installing the same chair. Would like to look at having a vice chair installed today as well. But just for record's sake, wanted to have this done today. It's not necessarily instigating a change, but just to have an action on the records.
I make a motion. Do you want that in the form of a motion? Okay, I would make a motion that you remain as the chair.
Is there a second to that motion?
I second it.
Motion has been proposed and seconded that Larry Wadman, remain the chair of the Board of Adjustments. All in favor?
Aye.
Who seconded that?
I did.
Oh, thank you.
There was no opposed, so do we need a vice chair, Amy?
Yes, that would be helpful.
So do we have any volunteers for vice chair?
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that we have Richard Reese be the vice chair for the Planning Commission Board of Adjustments, or Board of Adjustment Committee, so.
Is that because I gave the pledge, the thought and the prayer?
Yes, yeah.
Richard Reed or Richard Evans?
Richard Reese.
Oh,
Richard Reese. No, no. I don't. Have too many Richards here, so.
Yeah, we have a lot of.
Yeah.
Then I'll make a motion, or I'll second the motion that Richard Reese be the vice chair.
So it's been proposed and seconded that Richard Reese be vice chairman of the Adjustment Board. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll do all I can to support vice.
Any opposed except for Richard?
Yeah.
Okay. Minutes of last meeting held on June 27th.
and August 22nd. So those
August 22nd.
were in the packet. I don't know if there were any changes or motions relative to those.
I propose that we accept the minutes as written for both the 27th and the 22nd of August. All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, do we need a second on that one?
Yeah, if we could have a second.
Okay.
Thank you.
Richard, have a second.
I have one question. You know, in that meeting, has any progress been made on those folks who are gonna do with that piece of property down there?
We haven't heard anything specific. Happy to send that information on if we get an application. So, somebody came in asking about what they could do on the property, and that's about as far as it went.
I know that's. The positioning of the property. Who actually owns the property? I drove by there the other day and they're certainly moving a lot of dirt down there. And I assume maybe there's, they're making some progress. So,
Yeah, we haven't had an application for building permit that I'm aware of, but happy to look into that for you. And Brandon had a good clarification. So with the motion that included both of the minutes from June 27th and August 22nd. Okay, just wanted to make sure to clarify. No, we're happy to provide some additional information on that. Good questions.
And we move on to the variance application for reason we called this meeting. Is there someone who would like to present your reasons for the application?
You have a staff presentation as well.
We do have which?
A staff presentation, however you'd like to order that, Chair.
Okay, do you want to, well, let's let them make their proposal first and then we'll hear from the staff.
You're welcome to come up to the microphone.
Can two of us come at once or no? Okay, perfect. I'm Trevor Perry. I'm the project manager for the owners of this property that we're proposing the variance for.
And I'm Ellie Gordon. I'm the design representative of the property.
So we've never done this before. So tell us if we're doing it wrong or what we're doing right or what we need to do. So do you just want us to list our reasonings on each of these five points that we need to prove, or?
You're welcome to present it however you'd like. I think that's helpful context for the board as that's what's considered in the decision. But if you have any additional you'd like to provide, just one note, the applicants have appointed these individuals to represent for them. They are actually boarding a flight right at this very moment and weren't able to hop on the Zoom or anything in international.
Yeah, sorry, really quick. And I forgot to mention too, Scott Welker is also on the Zoom meeting. He is with our team as well. Scott, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yeah, hi.
Okay, we will just kind of do a little bit of introduction on the property. And then we'll just maybe summarize each of our five reasonings. And then if you guys have any questions, feel free. So we compiled these documents in order to present to you guys to get an approval for the variance on the Harmon property. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to read over any of this or whatnot. So we'll just kind of go through each one. The property, just as a little bit of a background, the property has a fault line on the very back of it. And so that immediately limits the buildable envelope. And then with the rest of the setbacks, it limits our buildable area to just under 10,000 square feet. And that includes giving room for the driveway, the landscaping, and as well as the house. And then on this particular house, the homeowners have had their architect draw a pool. And so that pool area has to be included in the 10,000 buildable square feet. So if Ellie wants to start with number one, and then we'll just kind of go back and forth.
Yeah, so the main reason why we're applying for this is for the fault line that's running through the property, which Trevor had kind of talked about. It restricts our building envelope. Ideally, the small portion of the garage that would overset the setback would be the corner of the garage, which you'll see on the exhibits that we included in your documents. Without this, this would directly be against the spirit of the setbacks and low and medium density zoning codes, which aim to reduce the density and proximity of homes within the neighborhood. We are working hard with the architect and the client as well to maintain the aesthetic of the neighborhood. That is also in our best interest, is to maintain Pleasant View City and the Pullbatch community, and maintaining how the neighborhood and also the residential home respects that as well. And that specific exhibit shown in your documents is Exhibit B. Thank you.
Okay, do you guys have any questions on that one or on the exhibit, what it's showing or anything?
I have one question.
Yeah.
You state that you can't build on the fault line. Is that
Yes.
correct? Has to be how many feet from the fault line?
We actually had a geologist go do a study on the property, and they came up with that from the very bottom of the fault line, we have to be 20.7 feet away from that. With any not any of the whole structure, but any of the footings of the structure. So there is one section that it's just a roof overhang that extends past the 20.7 feet, but the actual footings and foundation don't extend over that at all. Yeah.
With the was the home designed prior to the knowledge of the fault line, or what's the
history kind of. No, so the home was designed, so let me back up a little bit. When the architect was going through the process of the fault line, finding out where that was, and then also the setbacks, he did a little bit of research between calling Pleasant View City as well as Weber County. And he was told in the beginning that in order to build the house how it is now drawn, we would need a variance for the front setback. And then he went back and forth with Pleasant View City. I don't think whoever it was that he was talking to, I think her name was Amber. She's not able to be here. I don't think she works.
No longer works for this.
So she told him that he needed the variance, and then he did a little bit of research, and then he was told by a Pleasant View City employee that we didn't need the variance. So it actually went back and forth like 3 or 4 times.
But the city said didn't need the variance?
Yes. So that's kind of that's why the homeowners had the architect proceed in drawing this house, because we were told that we didn't need the variance. The homeowners actually, or the property owners actually had the variance application notarized with a check in hand and ready to go drop it off at their local mailbox to get it sent to Pleasant View. And then they heard from another Pleasant View employee that we didn't need the variance, so they stopped that. So they tried this kind of yes, no, back and forth on the variance has been going on since August. So
And so I was the one
Go
that, no, you're fine, that indicated the need for the variance. Obviously, if there's a plan that is counter to our city ordinances, then a variance is required. We can't approve plans at planning commission level or at any level that is in accordance with our ordinances unless there is a variance in place. And this qualifies for an application for a variance, which is why we're open today.
Any other questions? Yeah.
And I'm not certain on that. I looked at some old email exchanges and I couldn't find that in writing, so I'm a little bit unaware of that. I know in some initial discussions that I'd had with the developer, there were some questions about developing up a pole patch, and we do require a conditional use permit. So that was the first step that I indicated for them to proceed with, but I wasn't aware that the proposal didn't meet the setbacks.
I actually have a comment on that. When the architect was going back and forth with Pleasant View City and Weber County, he came across something that said any subdivisions that were recorded prior to 1970 did not need a variance for the setback that we're trying to get the variance.
So, and I'm
Oh.
not sure, and maybe the architects here, but I know there was a lot of correspondence with Weber County, but Weber County ordinances don't necessarily apply to the city. They're 2 separate entities, and that applies to unincorporated Weber County. So I know there was some confusion there as well.
So I don't know, with Amber not working here anymore, I don't know what was said or emailed or back and forth. But originally we were told, I think it went back 3 or 4 times. We need a variance. We don't need a variance. We need one. So that's why until Amy stepped in, we're going forward as if we didn't need a variance. So that's why the house is drawn as is on the plans now. And then as soon as Amy stepped in and realized we need it, that's, I think, why this meeting kind of came to a thing, so we could get this figured out. Any other questions on that part? We good to keep going?
Good.
Okay, perfect. Oh, it's my turn, sorry. The next point is number 2, there are special circumstances attached to the property that do not generally apply to other properties in the same zone. So if we look at Exhibit A, we see that there's Pine Ridge Drive, and actually corners with Waterfall Drive. So that is one condition that we felt was a special circumstance, giving it's a corner lot, and so the setbacks kind of pin you into what you're allowed to build in. And then The homeowners are outdoorsy, and they felt like when they bought this property that they wanted to push the house as close to the mountainside as possible. But then once we had the study done by the geologist due to the fault line, that kind of pushed the house back towards the road away from the mountainside. So between the fault line and the setbacks, we feel like there was a couple different special circumstances which limited the buildable area on this specific property. Sorry, any questions on that one before we go on? Okay, perfect.
Okay, so the next part we want to cover is granting the variance is essential to the enjoyment of substantial property right possessed by the property in the same zone. Compared to other homes in the area, the home we have proposed is comparable in size and characteristics. If not granted the variance, we believe that our home would be significantly limited. Furthermore, given the limitations already imposed on their property by the steep slope, fault line, and other setbacks involving 2 fronts, rear and side yards, as well as the shared property lines. If we are not granted a variance, the property right of the property owner and the enjoyment of that will be compromised, and they will not have, the same privilege granted that the fellow pole patch inhabitants, which is the privilege to use the property to the best of its ability. Are there any questions on that one?
Do you guys mind if I make a comment on this one?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm not sure why I am for you guys to come up on the screen or or what. I think some important context here is this particular zone. It's in the general plan. It's in the ordinance that this zone is kind of envisioned to be a zone with a lot of open space with a rural feel. And if you look at most of the homes within this area, they have a nice home on it, and then they have a lot of use of the outdoor space. Several of the homes have tennis courts, some have pools, lots of outdoor amenities. It's kind of the feel of this home, and it's consistent with what the general plan envisions there. And the problem that we're running into that's unique for this property because of where the fault line is, because of the slope that takes up a huge percentage of the lot, since the building area is only about 2.5% of the entire lot. What we're running into is if you put the home right up against the side, the side setback, that really limits anything that they can do outdoors on the property, any kind of outdoor amenities that they could put there, because there's a lot of things that, can't go. They can't put a swimming pool in the front yard, and there's a lot of things that can't go in front of the front line of the home. And so it would result in a home that they can put the home there, but they can't have any of these kind of outdoor uses that most of the homes in the community have. So it really limits them in a way that is different from their neighbors, and that puts them at an unfair disadvantage. And so that's why we think it's important that if we put it where it is, it's only a small portion of the home proportionally that is going to extend into the front setback, but then would allow them to have the same feel as the rest of the neighbors and use the outdoors the same way that is common in that area, and that really is envisioned in the general plan.
Question. What is the frontage in the home from the streets that are running through there? When you, if we approve this variance?
I can take an answer that one. Sorry, on Exhibit A, it's kind of small, but the frontage, it's over 100 feet on. So I know it's kind of hard to explain, but it's over 100 feet on everywhere except for it's just this little portion of the garage that is drawn outside of the red area. No, that area right there from the corner of the garage, the closest corner to the road, is 27 feet, 27.3 feet. Yep, from the road. So that's the only area that is actually that we're requesting the variance for, is just that corner of the garage. But I would like to make a note that, and this might be skipping a little bit ahead. If you move on to exhibit, I guess exhibit E, the way that we have landscaped the property, that corner of the garage that is that is protruding into the 50-foot setback is, if you look on the bottom picture, this little space right here that is just a little black line, that's the only part of the garage that will be seen from the road. The architect kept in mind that we were going to be closer to the road in that area, and so it's only a 1-story section right there. And then with the natural scrub oak that's there, that's the hope, is to keep as much scrub oak there as possible. And so it won't even, you would have to know that there is a garage there in order to see it as you're driving by.
And the areas of scrub oak are also included in Exhibit D as well. It's just roughly sketched in.
So just to put things in perspective, 20 feet is about from me to you. I'm guessing without measuring.
Yeah, maybe a little close, but yeah. Any questions or further questions on that? Okay. We'll go on to number 4. The variance will not substantially affect the general plan and will not be contrary to the public interest. Like we just mentioned, the variance is only being requested for that corner of the garage. 90% of the proposed home is located within the required setback. And much of the home is further back than that 50-foot setback. From an overall design perspective, the proposed home is held a maximum distance from the intersection of both the Waterfall Drive and Pine Ridge Drive. And again, the thick scrub oak will preserve the natural landscape barrier to oncoming traffic from both those roads.
It should be noted on that point too, that the staff agreed that this would not negatively affect the general plan.
Any questions on that one? Okay.
Okay, so finally, number 5, the spirit of the land use ordinance is observed and substantial justice is done. The proposed home and its footprint is in keeping with the properties in the same zone. The property has special circumstances that do not generally apply to other properties in the area. The proposed design and location of the home have been sensitive to preserving much of the natural landscape, as Trevor said, of thick scrub oak at the intersection of Waterfall Drive and Ridge Canyon Road. As previously mentioned above as well, the general plan of the home and landscaping will minimize the visual impact and uphold the spirit of the ordinance.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Sorry, can I make one more comment before we stop? On that point, there's an important one there, and I apologize. I'm the legal counsel here, so I focus on the technical things. The staff report, they listed that standard as the property will meet the ordinance as much as physically possible. That's not actually what the statute says that the landowner should be held to. It says the landowner should be held to the standard of whether the spirit of the land use ordinance is observed. So I want to make sure that when this is reviewed, that we're thinking about the correct standard under the law. And the question of whether the spirit of the land use ordinance is observed, I think plays more to questions like, is most of the home within the land use ordinance? And the answer there would be yes. And what is kind of the end result of it? The end result, as the staff agreed with in their report, is that it doesn't negatively affect the general plan. It doesn't disrupt the beautification of the neighborhood or the attractiveness of the community. So on that point, we would just ask that you please make sure that you're using the statutory language when looking at that and questioning whether the spirit of the land use ordinance is observed, not whether the ordinance is as has been met as much as physically possible, because that language isn't in the statute. That's not what we're asked. That's not what the state law asks the landowner to meet.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Did you want to add something?
Yes,
Yes.
I have an entire staff report that I have to share. So,
Oh, sorry.
that's okay.
No. Do you want me to to start in exhibits.
Yeah, so, if you could pull up Exhibit B, so I'll respond to each of them. I'll note that, just to get it out of the way, what's been noted is from their counsel is, seems to be accurate, that there was one condition in there that's not in the state statute. However, I do want to, before I give my staff report, note what it shares in state statute, that in determining this, in making this decision, the applicant shall bear the burden of proving that all of the conditions justifying a variance have been met. So it's not just one of them, and it's not just, you know, the idea of it wouldn't cause harm, but that all of the conditions need to be met. So get over to my staff report again.
Let me start at exhibit B. Is that-
Yes. Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties all of a sudden. Okay, so just to give a little bit of a summary, there is a geological fault line running across the property. The standard setback that's required in all conditions unless a variance is granted and determined to be found meeting those conditions is 50 feet for this zone. However, with regards to the geological fault, the setback there's also an additional setback that's required from that from the fault, unless professional expert opinion is given that it can be less than that. In this case, the applicant has specified 20.7 feet from the fault, not the front setback, but from the fault. And there is one minor exception to that, which is the eave encroaches on that 20.7 feet of the home. Staff doesn't believe that violates the intent or language of the ordinance. Because the way it's worded, it says that it cannot be built on or across the fault. We don't interpret the eave as being built on or across the fault. It's not across the fault itself that encroaches slightly into that recommended setback from the distance from the fault, and then it's suspended in air, and so we would say it's not on. So we think that is not really at issue with regards to this variance.
Well, that's one of the questions I would have, is that you can build on a fault line, you know, not right across the line, but you can build into that fault area. They just won't sell you insurance. You know, but very few homes in this whole area have earthquake insurance. It's just like there's floodplains up in the valley and all over, and you can build in a floodplain. They just can't buy flood insurance. Like, nobody will sell it to you.
I would say though, with our ordinance, it does require at least a 50-foot setback, if not determined otherwise by geologic experts. And so we do not allow for building a direct on top of the city.
So the only reason why staff is not challenging the location of the rear of the home is because they have a geotechnical report that's saying that they consider to be okay from a firm in the area. So with regards to the first criteria, the variance will not substantially affect the general plan. Staff has recommended that it doesn't have an effect on the general plan, but what we're stating there is that it's not causing essentially a problem or going against the general plan, but we're also not saying that, you know, that it does anything for the general plan or accomplishes those purposes. It's just saying no harm, no foul on this one. Is essentially what we're The next criteria is the criteria that Scott mentioned that is not in the ordinance. I'll go ahead and read from the state statute that I have.
Someone will pull that up on.
Sure. I'll go ahead and read our comment, just with the recognition that that's not what's contained in state code. The variance request is that the proposed single-family dwelling not be required to meet the required 50-foot setback. Staff professional opinion is, however, that the question to be determined is whether a substantial property right to build a single-family dwelling on this lot is able to be exercised without granting the variance in the interest of ensuring that the ordinance is met. There's approximately 9,850 square feet of area where the home may be built between the required front setback and the fault line based on staff calculations. And that's shown actually in Exhibit F, which we can pull up later. Staff's opinion that the single family dwelling may be built entirely within the area between the required front setback and the fault zone, and that this may be done without a variance while meeting the required setback. So I would state that the intent of a variance ordinance is to determine whether a person can meet the fundamental property rights within a zone, not meet them to their satisfaction. So if the fundamental or substantial property right in this case is that you have the right to build a home within the ordinance, including setbacks, things like that, then you're allowed to, meet the intent of the ordinance is that you're allowed to meet that while still meeting the rules, but not necessarily the home that you desire. The point is if the setbacks are so excessive on your particular lot, which has been granted approval by the city, they prevent the building of a home, period, then you have an issue, not whether they prevent building a home that's exactly the configuration or location that an applicant may desire.
So if I understand that correct, the opinion of staff is that a home could fit there, but maybe not this design as it is. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct. That's a very good summary of what staff positions. With the 9,850 square feet, there's still a lot that can be built on that. And that's the buildable area of lot that staff's estimated. It's not the size of the lot. So that's a pretty sizable area for a home. The driveway, not all of the driveway would be within that. It was indicated that it may be, but obviously the driveway has to be part of it has to be outside of that because it connects to the road and passes through that 50-foot setback area. So they're proposing a home in a pool. The corner of the home, I would estimate about 10% of it. That's just a guess. Goes into the 50-foot setback, but they still have that 9,850 square foot that between the 50-foot front setback and the fault zone that they've determined you could still put a footprint, and then yard space would be in addition to that. Yeah,
Go a little further.
Sure.
I'm curious. So would these requirements result in the existing architectural drawing in tweak somewhere so that it doesn't have to be
I'm not the architect, so I don't know if I'd use the word tweaked. I would say that they could be modified, but I don't know how much change to their layout would have to occur. There would need to be a modification, but at the same time, I know that the applicants made statements to the effect that they had, repeated conversations with the city, but where they feel that they were given different answers. But the challenge in that is, even if that's true, we don't have, first of all, we don't have verification of that. Second of all, the city at no point gave an official approval. So no, there was never a city official that we have on the record that granted a building permit or a conditional use permit and said, having reviewed all the facts and said, and having the proper authority, said, you are good to go ahead and build this. And so if a building permit had been issued and the city came back and said, oh, okay, now there's an issue, that would be a different condition relating to something called equitable estoppel. But there's no record and there was no formal permit granted in any way.
item
Okay.
still is required to go before planning commission for conditional use permit as well because of the area itself.
You had a comment?
If you don't
Oh,
mind,
you-
just for our recording, thank you very much.
So I just want to make a comment on the subject of whether or not plans would have to be redrawn, tweaked, whatever it would be, they would be scrapped and they would be redrawn just because of the way that the house stretches across the property and not back into the property, if that makes sense. In talking with the architect and the engineer, architectural plans alone have cost our client about $25,000 to $30,000 and $7,000 alone in engineering. So not only are we facing delays because of this, but it's also costing our client a significant amount of money as is to get this home. And so having to do it all over again would result in those fees being doubled. Thank you.
So I'll go ahead and continue with my comments. The next standard is that literal enforcement of the ordinance would cause an unreasonable hardship for the applicant that is not necessary to carry out the general purpose of the land use ordinances. Staff opinion is that literal enforcement of the ordinance would not cause an unreasonable hardship for the applicant necessary to accomplish that general purpose. The purpose statement of the A5 zone reads that the purpose of the A5 zone is to provide residential and limited agricultural uses and other uses provided they are compatible with flood control objectives and residential use. So staff's of the opinion that that the board should determine if the purpose of providing residential use and thus a single family dwelling in this zone may be accomplished on this property without granting a variance to the setback. And if so, that the 50-foot setback should be literally enforced in this case. Staff is of the opinion that a single family dwelling may be built, which again is the substantial property right for the zone, behind the 50-foot front setback, even with the fault without a variance being granted. The next condition is that there are special circumstances attached to the property that do not generally apply to other properties in the zone. There is a class one fault on the property. However, there are a number of locations where there are faults on the property within this zone and surrounding area. And the fault map's been in place for a number of years. I don't know the exact date, but it's clearly a very old document. And that information has been in one way or another, should have been publicly available. So the condition of having a fault on a lot is accounted for in the code with reasonable requirements imposed in such a case that there is a fault, which is where the setback from the fault comes from, is that's already been addressed. And the requirements, those requirements relating to the fault do not prevent the construction of a single family dwelling while still meeting the required front setback. And then I believe the last criteria is that granting the variance is essential to the enjoyment of a substantial property right possessed by other properties in the same zone. Staff believes that it is important to mention that the fundamental property right at issue is whether the applicant can build a single family dwelling on the property without a variance to the required setback, and not whether the applicant may build a home of the exact size, location, or configuration that they may prefer. Staff is of the opinion that the granting of the variance is not essential to the enjoyment of the substantial property right of building a single family residence on the property, and that the same property right of constructing a single family residence is able to be exercised on this property as the other properties in the zoning district without the granting of a variance. And I'll just see if I can make a summary comment that, again, the issue at stake is essentially whether they can build a home or not, given the conditions, not whether they can build the home that they prefer. And there was no formal action on the part of the city that said, you have final official approval that was by the proper authorities in writing, go ahead and start building. So for those reasons, the recommendations and, we understand that there's cost and expense relating to construction of architectural documents and construction plans. But again, those were completed without the formal approval of a setback. And so they were prepared either before they were prepared before the conditional use permit was granted. And so which it has not yet been granted and as well, has not even been considered. So that's, a matter of I think sort of due diligence, not something that I believe that the city bears responsibility for. The recommendation by staff is that the requirements are not satisfied for a variance and recommends denial of the application for a variance from the 50-foot front setback requirement for the A5 zone on that basis. Staff further recommends that the board should consider the information presented, deliberate, and determine whether or not the requirements for a variance have been met. Finally, staff notes that upon the outcome of the Board of Adjustments decision, staff will be happy to either process an adjusted conditional use permit application and building permit application that meets the front setback requirements and other requirements for a building permit and conditional use permit with an approved variance. So I'll just kind of show you two of the exhibits, if that's all right. There's exhibit B, which is massive application that he has right now. There's also exhibit shows the this is an estimate, but it is, I think, pretty accurate. You can see there's a gray sort of thick line rectangle that runs through just behind the home. That is the area that's been determined by the geotechnical report to not be safe to build in. The only encroachments are the eave. The foundation is just outside of that. And then if you'll zoom in just a little bit more, thank you. There's this, you can see this red triangular sort of shape is the buildable area given the setback. So it's the front of the lot minus the required setbacks. There's the portion, are you able to remove that sticky note? Okay, that's great.
Sorry.
No, you're great, thank you. There is the portion of the home that's the garage and I think a little bit of the living quarters that go in front of that. But within that triangle, again, is 9,850 square feet. That's not the lot size, that's the buildable area that they could put a home in. And so there's quite a bit of area that's I think it's to the east, that's yard space that additional footprint could go in. They're also using a portion of the buildable area for a home for a proposed pool. And so we think that there's more than sufficient area for the applicant to exercise the substantial property right of building a home without a variance. So I'm happy to answer any other questions that the board may have.
I have a question just for clarification. So are you saying that the developer, they designed a lot or designed a house on a lot before getting a permit, even before bringing it to the city to get a building permit? Is that what we're saying?
Well, yes. I mean, they have to, everyone, in fairness to them, everyone has to build some or do
Have
some
some
degree of
design,
work, right? How much that is up to them. But at the same time, they can check with the city, they can do the setbacks. The setbacks are publicly available. They're on the website. And so, how much design that they do prior to applying for a building permit formally or a conditional use permit is up to them. But the setbacks were able to be known that were required under, a standard situation prior to, without them building, prior to them preparing the plans. Best way to
The question was asked early on. My question to you was, did the architect and the owners, were they aware of the fault line and the setback requirements, prior to creating plans? And your answer was yes, correct? Okay.
The sand we carved out.
Well, I would say from the city standpoint, yes, just because this is not only subject to the variance here, but then also a conditional use permit, which can modify the plans and some of that footprint as well.
When I went to land use training Clearfield years ago, when we went through the handbook and through a lot of these things, they really stressed the fact that you don't grant changes that are just for convenience. They have to meet these criteria. And the first one has got me, literal use of the ordinance would cause unreasonable hardship for the applicant. I can see where it's going to cause extra expense. But since they were aware of they're already infringing upon the fault line, they're infringing upon the setback. So they kind of tried to squeeze a house in, maybe a different house would fit in there better. That's my thought.
So can I comment on that quickly? There is another factor to consider here. There's also HOA regulations they're trying to comply with. And the HOA requires a minimum 3,600 square foot house and a 3-foot garage. So you start to eat up that space pretty quickly. And so I agree the ordinance doesn't say you can build any house you want, but I think we would all also agree that it would be unfair if there was, if we said, well, you get a much smaller house than the rest of your neighbors and a much different looking lot than the rest of your neighbors. I think that the spirit of the law and the ordinance is somewhere between that. And so they're not asking for a Taj Mahal. They're saying we want to meet the HOA's requirements, get something that's similar to what all of our neighbors have. And we think we can do that with a small encroachment into the setback. And for what it's worth, we do have several emails from the architect who, at least his impression, speaking with the city, was that his conveyance to us was that he was being told by them, yeah, you'll very likely get a variance. So that's the impression he was acting under. I get that it's not a formal approval from the city, but I also think it's reasonable that an architect would take that into consideration when they're drawing up the initial plans.
Is there any other questions, comments? Do we hear a motion to make a decision on this?
Can I say something real quick, Mr. Chairman? So I'm having some difficulty with, this is a kind of unique, this is a 5-acre lot. Their neighbors are far away from them. This isn't an RE20 or RE15 issue where you're really encroaching on your neighbor and having a problem. Has there been anybody from the public address this issue at all, the variance? Has anybody? Okay. So I'm just struggling with those houses and there's a lot of acreage, and I know there's probably, if you look, there's probably been some considerations made in the past for some of those houses that were already up there. So I have
sorry. I did get a little bit of comment, and I don't know if they're watching the meeting today, but when we had this notice for the conditional use permit, because again, there was a little bit of confusion on kind of what they were seeking. And so we've noticed it and then caught the discrepancy with the setback. But we did have a couple come in who have property in the Pole Patch area that are interested in similar type layout and variance, frankly. So I know that there was a little dialogue there. Wanted to disclose that.
And then if I can just make one additional comment with regards to just, obviously staff has made our recommendation that the variance not be granted. Conditions have been fulfilled. It's obviously the board's decision. I would make just one procedural note that if you decide to grant the variance, I would be specific in the language that you use, just something to the effect of, not to exceed the current proposed location of the homes. That will be your decision about how to do that, but just for the sake of clarity when it comes time for the conditional use permit and the building permit, so that staff is able to administer the decision well, so that we know where exactly the variance applies. Because if the variance was granted too broadly, then it could be interpreted that the variance, that the setback was able to be encroached upon along the entire width of the lot. So that's the concern that I have, one concern that I have.
And on many other lots, potentially. I'm concerned about the precedent of a variance on a setback like this.
Staff shares the
Maybe
same
something you have to live with. you know.
Staff shares the same concern.
Yeah, and these comments actually hit on something that we have a common concern with, believe it or not. If you look at the exhibit that's up, most of the buildable area is right there next to lot 27. And so part of our concern is that reconfiguring the home in a way that the only way we can think to do it that doesn't impede into that front variance would be to get closer and closer to that lot 27. And the home in lot 27, which is diagrammed there, is close to the border there too. And so that is one of our major concerns. We don't want to be right up against that home, especially in an area where the homes are spread out and it's designed in a way that they're supposed to be spread out. So we would ask that be considered as well in the analysis.
I guess what I'm struggling with is the letter of the law compared to the spirit of the law in this particular case. So, it's just some of my concerns. I understand what staff's saying. If you've had, you're concerned about setting a precedence where variance is granted in this case, you're going to have other lots that'll be sold that will want considered variances or in their aspect trying to get a bigger house on a similar lot. That's what we're talking about. Bram?
Yes, but also that the issue is being framed correctly and that the state statute says that the burden of proof rests upon the applicant that all the conditions must be.
Sure.
And I just kind of reiterate what Brandon said before. In whatever motion is given, I think we need to make sure to focus on those key points in the state code and all of them be addressed. So whether it's in affirmative or denial of the proposal, to focus in on those and how those address that, just for the record's sake.
A good subject. In this area of Polpatch, is there a limitation on square footage of the homes?
The HOA has various limitations related to that, but it's not a city regulated item. And so it's not something that we really dug into because it's a separate thing. And if there's a variance request there, I know they have certain setback guidelines, and I'm guessing the applicant's doing the same with the HOA board in order to meet some of those as well. They've got kind of a separate set of rules, but we don't govern those, and they are modifiable just like ours are.
You know what I'm struggling with? I look at this. I don't know how big this home is going to be. I'm guessing it's in excess of 3,000 square feet. But
So to answer your first question, the HOA does require a minimum of a 3,600 square foot house, and then with an attached 3-car garage to fit within that buildable area. So there is the Pleasant View requirements as well as the HOA requirements up there.
well, what? I don't know. There's a minimum 3,600 square foot.
Correct.
Of livable space. So the way the HOA restrictions read is that's the livable space, and then the 3-car garage would be in addition to that.
Yeah, that is also one of the struggles. As you can see, the architecture of the house to be a long and skinny rectangle. And then with the way you can kind of see it on this one, that red, I guess it's kind of a little triangle shape. That's the buildable space. So I'm not sure. I'm sure there are ways, but I'm not sure what the outcome of the house would look like if you tried to cram a 3,600 square foot plus a 3-car garage in that weird kind of shape. And then, not that it concerns Pleasant View City, but we do have to also present the house to the HOA and get their approval. And they're not saying their approval all depends on this, but they want the house in the neighborhood to match the standard that they are like Polpatch is kind of a higher end neighborhood and a lot of bigger houses, fancier houses. So they will restrict what you can and can't do as far as the look of the house and the exteriors of the house.
I also would ask if I may speak up. Sorry, I'm Steve Pierce. I'm the builder, and I'm
If you could come to the mic, please, Steve, or we can bring it to you if that's easier. Sorry.
I'm Steve Pierce. I'm the builder here, actually, and I'm also the president of the Home Builders Association in Northern Wasatch this coming year. And while I agree with staff, as you look at that, you realize the practicality, a lot of that square footage that he talks about, well, we've got all this buildable area. It's in a little wedgy triangle right there. And a lot of the stuff on this front side has some serious slope to it. And so it does create some problems. Again, I'm not arguing the point that it couldn't have been done. The architect drew this house with the understanding verbally with the city that it would work. It wasn't that nobody went to sleep and didn't do that. I promise you it wasn't. We're used to this. And you don't get building permits usually until you have plans. And so we need some kind of a way. And I know as the HBA, we're struggling with that too, is how do we come to the city and ask you what's going to be okay or what's not okay before we even draw a plan, you know? And so I think at this point here, that's what we're asking. We could do better. We could have done better and maybe got something officially more in writing verbally before we moved ahead. But I think this couple as professionals and are going to be an asset to this community are not coming in trying to bulldoze any kind of ordinance. I promise you with Pleasant View, they're caught in a situation now that we're asking for some leniency on this if possible, you know, that they could hopefully build this house that's to their liking. If we have to make some changes, we'll always respect the law and your ordinances. But that buildable area of 9,000 some other square foot is really not that much when you consider the wedges we're dealing with, especially up in that point. Thank you.
So a question for Amy so you said that Colfax has their HOAs requirements. So no matter what we did here, there's a possibility that they would say they would reject what they're proposing to build up there.
Yes, I would say there's that possibility. It's really because it's a separate entity, it's not something we necessarily take into a lot of consideration. But yes, there's that possibility.
I think it's fair to say that what should be considered is the city's statute and the state statute. HOA is a separate matter, and the city is not responsible to ensure a home can be built that meets the HOA requirements. Those are a private matter that the city doesn't have an interest in. And so the conversation, I believe, should be focused on whether or not they can build a home that meets the city requirements within the requirements for the zone.
Well, I agree in the scope of what we need to do here. I agree with that 100%. I was just asking a question for clarifications.
Well, I will say that I think all factors are relevant when we're talking about what their hardship's going to be. If the city can approve something that just can't get through the HOA, then that presents a hardship, and hardship is a significant part of what the statute asks you to consider.
I have a question for staff. So when we talk about the spirit of the ordinance and the 20 feet that we're talking about, Brandon, is that an aesthetic issue, or is it a safety issue, or is it a combination of both?
The spirit of the land use ordinance, is that?
Well, yeah, these guys in their argument have said that they're meeting the spirit of the ordinance, because of the landscaping and it's aesthetically pleasing, and you won't be able to see the garage because of, within this short 20 feet, there's going to be a whole bunch of landscaping and.
Also 27 feet.
Okay. So 27 feet. Thanks for the clarification. But is the, when the city has the 50 feet requirement, is that a safety issue? Is it a aesthetic issue, or is it a combination of both?
I would say it is specific to this zone, something to consider. Other zones have different setbacks from the front. So some of them do have 20-foot setback depending on the zone. If that helps.
And I think it's fair to say that it's likely an aesthetic issue, but there are many issues that are aesthetic within cities, whether we admit it or not. And so sometimes, people consider those a lesser consideration, but everybody else, that hasn't received an ordinance, which are thousands of variants, have followed the setbacks within their zone. And so your question, if I recall, was what does the spirit of the ordinance, land use ordinance relate to? So I think that there is the setback that's a core part of that. But I also think that when you talk about the spirit of the land use ordinance, going back to the purpose statement, is that that the applicant has the ability to build, the question of whether the applicant has the ability to build a single family home according to city ordinances without a variance. I think that's the spirit part to me is a single, are you able to build a single family home that meets the ordinances just based on the city regulations? And staff's of the opinion that the answer to that question is yes.
I think the spirit of the land use is that everybody comply 100%. Because as soon as you start making a lot of exceptions, pretty soon you got people building a house out in the middle of the road. And they think it's aesthetic and it's good for the city. You know, so you can, I mean, it can go both ways. So the spirit of the whole land use deal is just to set the rules, and as best possible, everybody comply with those rules.
So the geotechnical report gave him some relief, right, because of that, and the staff didn't have any issue with that, correct?
That is correct. Staff does not have issue with the recommendations with regards
So
to.
they have got some relief from that report then.
Yes. So I think it was
20.7 feet.
Yeah, 20.7 feet. So that's 30 feet that they would be able to build on the lot where they, according to ordinance, if a professional didn't recommend a reduction of that, that they've gained in buildable area.
So with that 27.7 feet, does that not let you build what you proposed? For with that factored in, does that not
Correct.
help you achieve what you want?
It does, but then with that triangle shape, I think just that little corner just protrudes because the way the fault line goes and then the intersection of those two roads, it kind of forces that buildable area to be that triangle shape area. Thank you.
We have a motion. Well, we gotta vote one way or the other, so.
I agree.
One last.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I think it was you that asked whether or not we had any communication with the city, and we were just concerned that it was just a verbal thing. Who was saying what?
Well, that wasn't the question. The question was, more specifically, was did the owner and the architect and the builder, were they aware prior to the plans being drawn, were they aware of the fault and the 50-foot setback? And your answer was yes.
Yes, correct.
That they were aware of that.
Yes. And then I was able to find the email correspondence between the architect and Amber, the Pleasant View city employee. She responds to the architect, James. She says, James, thank you so much for your patience. This appears to need a variance, and chances are high as there are conditions on the property which are not self-imposed. So that is kind of where we proceeded to continue with this plan. And knowing that, yes, we'll need a variance, but as she states here, it was likely that we will get the variance approval with the plan drawn as it is. So, thank you.
So I struggle with that a little bit, simply because, and I'll just throw it all out on the table here. But if I'm a consumer and I'm going to go have some plans drawn, and they're going to be to the tune of $20,000 to $30,000, to draw up the plans, and I'm basing that on a highly likely or probably. I know personally, I would never do that. I wouldn't base a $20,000 or $30,000 decision unless I had a lot of money to burn on a highly likely or a maybe. That's my opinion. And so personally, I think just because of that, I'm kind of struggling with this whole thing. But because of that, I would have to agree with staff, on this issue. So that's where I'm at.
For me, as attractive and beautiful as the design is, I'd love to see something up there like this. But the law is very clear on what our authority at this table consists of. And all 5 of those criteria have to be met for us to grant a variance. And I'm not convinced, like the staff, and I agree with them that number 5, we're not there. So that's where I'm coming down.
So we have a motion before the board.
Just so I'm a little more clear on this also, staff feels that you could still build a home meets them and require that's on that law within, parameters that are established.
That is correct, based on city ordinances, which is what the city's responsibility is to enforce. That within the parameters of city requirements, that a home could be built that meets the requirements of the ordinance.
And the builder, if I heard correctly early on, you mentioned that, a home could be built there, but that it would be at great expense because new plans would have to be drawn. Is that correct?
A lot of this is handled by the architect.
Right.
We just kind of. So.
Stained architects.
Too bad he's not here.
Yeah. We have a motion in.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make the motion that the variance be. Let's see, how's the best way to word this? Based on current code and the 50-foot requirement of the 50-foot setback, and the fact that home can be built with the 50-foot setback. Of course, it would have to be with the plans. I would make the motion that the variance request be denied.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Richard Reed seconds it. All those in favor of denying?
Hey, Mr. Chairman, can we just have some discussion before I take the vote, just real quick? Can I just say a couple of things before I take the vote? Just some discussion before we vote?
Normally, once you make the motion, you go into the vote instead of, is it going to change your vote?
No, I just want to add it for the record. So I just want to make,
Go ahead.
yeah, I just want to make a comment that as much as I'd like to get there and approve that, the variance, I just, from staff report and going through the report here by everybody and the questions that I've asked, I just can't see how in our scope, how we can on today that we can grant that variance. So as much as I would like to, but it's not gonna,
We'd all like to, I think.
I just can't see it happening.
We'd all like to see nice houses
Right.
going in,
Right.
but they have to comply. So, okay, we have the motion. It's been seconded to deny the request for an adjustment to this property. All those in favor of denial, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Motion carries. The Board of Pardons, and I would just make the comment that you do have a recourse. You can go to a federal court. But my biggest concern is that if we wrote up a statement saying we approve this, I don't know how we could legally write a description for a judge to agree with us that we did our our duty to hold to the ordinances as the state is constituted, we would have to really word it very carefully. But that is your recourse. You can go to federal court and ask for them. I don't think there's ever been a change from a federal judge over a board pardon, but board of adjustments, but there's always a first. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time. Well, we all want to see progress, but it's got to be done. That's why they have ordinances. One comment, we had a Board of Adjustments meeting years ago where they have 100 foot of frontage, it was down 1,000. And they only had 98 feet. And we went ahead and approved that. But the big question came up was now that we've approved 98, the next person's going to come in for 95. And then what do you do? And then it keeps going, you know, so, but I contacted somebody who has a lot more experience on this, and he said, with the Board of Adjustments, you don't go by precedence. Every case is a whole new ballgame. It's different circumstances, it's different deals. So you can't, somebody can't come in and say, well, you granted so-and-so, you know, a variance. Why can't I get it? Because yours is a whole new ballgame. Has nothing to do with them or how many feet or how many inches or anything else. We looked at that situation and we granted a variance. We could look at a very similar situation and say, no, it's not going to work. So every deal is a new ballgame.
It's hard to approve it if staff's not recommending it.
Right. And for Amy, she has to write up the description of what took place here. And for them to legally contest it, she has to be very careful how she words it so that she doesn't leave them a loophole to come in and say that we didn't treat them fairly.
Well, one major advantage is you have audio recording, and so that.
Right. Yeah. It's very. So could I make one comment? Hold that a little further away. Just Board Member Wade, your comment about you're not a planner, et cetera. I just want to respond to that a little bit. I actually take a different view, and my view is that my job as a planner is to facilitate and empower educated decisions. So I do have benefit of professional experience and training, but my job, I'm more, as you saw tonight, I'm more than happy to give a recommendation, but I also am trying to lay out the different facts and not steer you to a particular decision, and to empower you to make an educated decision, because, even though I have professional experience and training, you are the governing body and you're the land use authority. So my job is to lay out as much of the facts as I can, and then let you as a body reason through that. I would hope that you never feel that I'm hoping or expecting that you act as a rubber stamp to my recommendations. I look at it quite the opposite.
That's why I would.
No, we appreciate your insight.
I'm trying to look at it and go, I don't know what's it gonna, I'm trying to see through their prism.
Yeah.
What they're looking at, how that's gonna affect all part of the department.
I think you did a great job, Brandon, and just to put your mind at ease about the rubber stamp issue. I spent 40 years in my career on that side of the table. I was over building and development for a large company, and I spent many, many hours in front of city councils and boards just like this one. And in that whole time, we always made sure that we always had our ducks in a row, and we had crossed our T's and dotted our I's. And that's why I asked the question early on, were you guys aware of the fault and the...
I think think someone needs to adjourn the meeting.
Thanks, Larry.
I think we need to adjourn the
I
meeting.
think the
at some
fact
point.
that we don't meet often as a board says a lot about the quality of work that goes on with. Just commend the staff for all their due diligence and all of their efforts. So, you know,
So we're,
file that away somewhere.
yeah, we're ready
Thank
to
you.
have Brandon here. Can we get a motion to adjourn in a second?
I'll make the motion to adjourn. All right. I think, I know Larry did, I heard.
They'll call it in.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful holiday.
You too.
Yeah, very much.
Brandon, how long have you been